Em sento molt honorat per ser aquí directement à un auditoire qu'Allah. Je crois que el meilleur corps tient un petit qu'Allah. So I am very honored to be here with this culture that I feel a great kinship to. And I can't tell you why that is, but the first time that I was ever around the Catalan language and people, I felt like these were people I understood, and I felt that they understood me. And I hope that this will be true today. And one of the things that I am trying to do with my life is to eliminate broadcast media. I want to eliminate all of those media that come at you and do not listen and cannot speak back. I want to make it possible for all the cultures that don't come out of Hollywood to have as much voice in the world as the one that comes out of Hollywood. And that includes this one, which has much to say that many in the world have never heard and have never experienced. And the means by which I hope to do this is twofold. First, by going into places where there are people from other cultures and not being a broadcast medium myself, not being somebody who talks at you, but somebody who talks with you. Because the internet and cyberspace is a conversation in which all of humanity may converse one day. If the internet continues to grow at its present rate of growth, which has been doubling in size every 9 months since 1969, when it was first placed online, by the year 2003, every man, woman, and child on the planet Earth would have an email address. I don't actually think that's going to happen. But I do think that we're going to come closer to that than most now recognize. I just spent 2 months in Africa trying to find ways to attach the informational electrode to Africa and wire the interior of Africa so that it could speak back to us. I was astonished to discover that they were already prepared to speak back, and the telecommunications were widely deployed throughout Africa, and that the preparation for an information economy was in many ways more advanced than it is here in the Northern Hemisphere, where we have many habits of mind that make it extremely difficult for us to understand what it is to be in an information economy and to be part of a great conversation. We are very used to the idea in the North that we are supposed to be part of something uniform, whether we are machine parts in a great industrial engine that creates goods, or whether we are the market that those goods are sold to. There has been much that has tried to make us not individuals and not cultures, but part of generica, part of a great homogenized mass. Much of what we do in education, and this is important for us to discuss here, much of what we have done in education in the Northern Hemisphere has been about trying to create interchangeable machine parts in the form of human beings for large industrial organizations. It's been about trying to turn human beings into machines. Now we are at the end of that period, and we are trying to turn machines into human beings. And this is a very different project. And furthermore, we are entering into an economy where difference, instead of being a liability or a deficit, is now a value. Because in an information economy, any difference has value. Whether it's the difference between the Deutschmark and the dollar at precisely this moment, or the difference between corn prices in the United States and corn prices next February, or the difference between the culture of Catalonia and the culture of California. All of those gaps, all of those differences are things that may be economically harnessed, and we must learn how to appreciate, understand, and encourage difference in a way that we have not. In order to do that, we have to change our whole educational approach from one that specializes in teaching compliance, uniformity, and punctuality, one in which you simply receive the information and sit there with your hands neatly folded in your lap while the professor speaks, to one in which you may know more than the professor. Now, Socrates knew that this was the best way to learn 2,500 years ago. And in fact, this is the way that most people learned all through the period prior to industry. And in fact, when you think about how this place was built, this city, how the people who learned how to lay these stones, they did not go to a stone laying lecture at all. They came as very young people to somebody who knew how to lay stones like this, and they watched and they helped him with the hard work. And one day, the knowledge that was in him became part of them and became a living thing and moved on. We are now entering into a condition where we may start to learn that way again. Let me ask you, how many of you know how to operate a computer? Really? Well, no, raise your hands if you do. Feel free. Now, come on. I know one thing about this culture, which is that it's sometimes a little shy. Okay. That's all right. In Wyoming, where I come from, we're sometimes a little shy. How many of you learned how to do that in a class? You see what I mean? You learned how to do it by doing it with other people in a perfectly horizontal environment. And this has great effects on how we are to be educated in the future. That's one of the things that I want to discuss with you. Another thing I want to discuss with you is the opportunity and the peril of liberty. We are, as a species, embarked on something profoundly important. We are creating the first free place that all of humanity could ever gather. We must be able to rise to this opportunity and be good ancestors. The responsibility that we have in creating the foundations of this great free place cannot be overestimated. It is not out of the question that at some time in the not so distant future, every human being will be able to converse directly with every other human being. And that if you have something to say, that expression will be able to reproduce itself without cost to every other person in the world who is interested in it. And this is already to a large extent true. I get electronic mail. I attached my computer this morning here in Morella to a computer in Barcelona, and I got electronic mail from 15 different countries, from people I had never heard of, who had read what I had written and wanted to know more directly from me about what I meant. I think that this is a profound and important fact, because never before, if you had something to express, could you engage immediately in a conversation with your readers. Never before could you have the experience of expression. What people have been dealing with since Gutenberg has been information. And the difference between information and experience is that when you're having an experience, you can ask questions. Now, many people, especially in the United States, no longer know the difference between information and experience. In fact, they construct their whole map of reality based on the assumption that what they see, the world that is presented to them on television, bears some real relationship to the world. It does not. It is, in fact, an hallucination, a mass hallucination, which in the United States is caused by the fact that what television does is to sell the attention of the people who watch it to the advertisers. And as such, really their only job is to harvest and fertilize human attention. So there are very easy ways to do this. Human attention is easily fertilized by fear, violence, and sex. And they have created a reality that is much more fearful and violent and sexual than the one that any of us actually live in our everyday lives. This has also been true with other media, going back even as far as Gutenberg. Now we can end that hallucination. We can start to ask questions. And if you think about where you are right now, in addition to being able to ask questions of me, you are asking questions of this whole room every second. You are having an experience. You are feeling the air. You're knowing that it is thinner air than you're used to because you're in the mountains. You are hearing different sounds. You're watching the body language of the other people in the room, and you can constantly look and see and learn more by asking with your senses more questions. You are having an experience. Cyberspace is about having the ability to do that even when your body is not present. But this creates some very serious issues, not only because of the freedom that it promises. and the opportunity for different cultures to express themselves, but also how to govern that which cannot be governed. And I am telling you that cyberspace is not a place that can be governed very easily, because it's hard to say where the body is. And the way in which government works, and always has worked, is by creating a zone within which the body was, and saying that that which the body does inside this area is subject to our control, and if the body does something that is against our laws, we can do something to the body. We can imprison it, we can torture it, we can kill it. You cannot imprison or torture or kill anyone in cyberspace. And furthermore, there are no jurisdictions that count. There is no way that a culture that may find something offensive in cyberspace can keep another culture from placing that offensive material on the hard disks that lie in its domain, or keeping the people within its own culture eventually from finding those hard disks and getting the information off of them. I had a friend who was recently in China, where it is widely thought that the internet is being controlled, and he was visiting a family, and the mother was doing the laundry, and she got a piece of paper out of her son's shirt pocket which had a lot of numbers on it that she couldn't understand. And my friend said, "Oh, I know what those numbers are. Those numbers are the addresses of certain computers." Which means that her 13-year-old son had figured out how to get around the filtering system that was placed by the Chinese government by simply getting the information of the exact number of the internet address of the computer that had the information that he wanted, which was probably pornographic. So here's a 13-year-old who has already figured out a way to become more powerful than the government of the People's Republic of China. This is going to ask a lot of questions of those who now have power. In fact, I think every existing power relationship that is presently established on the planet is going to be renegotiated completely over the next 30 or 40 years. And many people who now have power will not have power when this is over. Many institutions that have existed throughout the industrial period will no longer exist. I will be very surprised if there are still nation states in 50 years. There will be nations, like the Catalan nation, but there will not be nation states. There will be city-states, of which I think Barcelona will be one, that will be more important. City-states will become more important than they have been at any time since the Renaissance. And there will be places in cyberspace where huge amounts of information is exchanged and many different cultures come together. And how those places will be governed, the governance of those places, is the interesting question that we have to ask here, and will be asking again and again. This is, I think, one of the most important times in human history. I believe that the internet and the things that will come as the result of the internet will transform what it is to be human more than any other technological event since the capture of fire. And like fire, it will warm us, and it will make it possible for us to have civilization. And like fire, it will burn us, and harm us. People ask me whether I think the internet is a good thing or a bad thing, and this is to me like asking whether the weather is a good thing or a bad thing. It's a big thing, and it has many different effects. And we must try to be prepared for this big thing and be brave as we drive over the cliff of civilization into what I think will be a very different place than the one we now live. Now, having said these things, and having already talked much longer than I intended to, I will make good on my original promise to try to interact with you. So I would hope that you would come back at me and tell me what you think, and what you think I might know that you would like to know, and what you think you know that I would like to know. And I'm not going to say anything more until one of you does.
En tot el que vostè està explicant, el tema de les llengües pues, pot acabar, no? El tema de les llengües minoritàries, llengües majoritàries, cap on podem anar?
I used to be very concerned that English was going to wipe out every other language on the planet. I mean, that would be, you know, you would think as a native English speaker I would be happy with that, but I'm not. I like the way different languages can say different things. There are things that can be said in Catalan that can be said in no other language in the world. I now think that while English may become a language that almost everyone speaks in the world, it will be the lingua franca that Latin was at one time. And it's a good thing to have a lingua franca, and it's also a good thing to have one's own language. And I do not believe any longer that languages will be threatened by it. In fact, they will be strengthened, because languages that are marginal, and I have to say that Catalan is one of them, small languages that have not been able to produce the amount of literature that they are capable of, will suddenly be able to produce a lot of literature, because it will no longer depend on the industrial market for books and how many people are willing to buy those books. You can now write in Catalan and publish for nothing. And anybody who is anywhere on the planet who wants to know that language or hear those things that can only be expressed in it will suddenly be able to have access to its literature. I think that instead of killing languages, which broadcast media have tended to do, that the internet and the things that fall after it, that the environment of cyberspace will increase the strength of different languages. And I have had many arguments with the French about this, but I'm very pleased to say that the French have finally decided that the best way to fight is to put as many sites on the internet as they possibly can in French, which is the smart thing to do. And so now there is, whereas only a couple of years ago there were very few French-speaking sites on the internet, now all across northern Africa and equatorial Africa, there are thousands and thousands of French sites. The only place that seems to be lagging behind is France.
Com es pot fer perquè França entengui millor que s'ha d'anar cap al futur? Com pot vostè tenir influència sobre el poder estatal i nacionalista de París, per exemple?
I have spent many years trying to convince French people of things, unsuccessfully. But what I see happening in France and in many other parts of the world that are resistant, and the United States is actually one of these, is that the young people are taking a very different view of this. The young people feel the future, and they are already natives in a land where many of their parents are immigrants. And I take a lot of solace in something that an old enemy of mine once said. We were also friends, but we were political enemies. And he was much older than I was. And we were going someplace to a meeting in Wyoming and drinking whiskey as we drove and arguing. And he said, one thing, John Perry, you should remember is that one day I'll be dead and you won't. I mean, the best way to convince somebody is to wait for them to go away. I think that this will change very rapidly because one of the things that all of Europe has done so far to retard the growth of the internet has been the use of the PTTs, the large state-run telecommunications monopolies, to stop that spread by having extremely expensive local phone calls. And it has not been practical for you to get onto the internet in most parts of Europe because it simply costs too much to make that call. Deregulation is about to happen everywhere in Europe. And even something like France Telecom, which is very wily and resistant to change, is going to have to accept the fact that there are many, many ways to get a bit from one place to another. You can get it through the electrical system, you can get it through the cellular systems, you can get it through microwave, and in another couple of years, every single part of the planet will have low Earth orbit satellites with high bandwidth where anybody anywhere can get an internet connection at a reasonable price. And you will no longer have to depend on France Telecom or Telefonica or any of these organizations who understand instinctively that the internet is going to kill them and have been trying to stop it.
El meu nom és Isidor Marí i voldria comentar una de les seves afirmacions que crec que és certa. Tots ens hem d'esforçar perquè aquest ciberespai sigui un espai de llibertat. Crec, però, que pensar que la llibertat és l'absència de lleis és una mica enganyós. La llei en un sistema democràtic serveix per protegir el feble i no estic segur que en un ciberespai sense regulació estiguem en una situació de llibertat de totes les persones i de totes les cultures, perquè probablement hi ha també grans colonitzadors d'aquest ciberespai que poden convertir-se en intermediaris de la informació i crear noves audiències captives diferents de les del sistema broadcast, però de totes formes maneres diferents, noves, d'esclavitzar les persones. Creu que hi pot haver alguna manera de posar-nos d'acord en un nou contracte social per regular en favor de la humanitat i en contra dels intermediaris aquest ciberespai?
I'm very optimistic. I think that freedom will win because in the past the way in which power has asserted itself has been with the ability channel the flow of information, exactly as you say, and to create specific realities in which you could know some things and not know others. If I were completely unafraid of, say, Microsoft, for example, or the United States government, or some of the other entities that are trying very hard to control cyberspace, I would not have the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I would not be doing what I'm doing in going around and trying to convince people of the importance of making certain that this starts out as an open system. As it is right now, technically, the technical architecture of the internet is such that it interprets censorship as a malfunction and roots around it. And it interprets any effort to control it as a malfunction and roots around it. This is a communications system that was designed to resist such efforts at control as nuclear attack, where large parts of it, it would be assumed, would be wiped out. This is not to say that we have nothing to be concerned about. There is also, as you say, the concern about protecting the weak from the strong. But I think when the weak can speak and the strong cannot make them stop, the weak become stronger. Now, how do we govern ourselves without laws? And I would suggest that one of the things that you know here in this area that has been lost in many parts of the world is that every bit as important as law in government is ethics. And that the more legalistic a society becomes, the less ethical it is. As we go into a condition where laws become weaker, it is my conviction that human beings will regain their consciences to a greater extent than they have them now. And I think that there is evidence of this in the fact that cyberspace now contains as many as 100 million people of very different cultures, very different opinions, and yet, in many ways, is a surprisingly peaceful and equitable place because it has a culture with a set of ethics about what is right and wrong. And the basis of that ethical system is the idea that everybody has a right to speak and that everybody has a right not to listen.
¿Quién manda o quién debe mandar en la comunicación institucional, universidad, sociedad?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things about cyberspace is that the group that seems to have the hardest time becoming involved in that communications are the present-day elite. The businessmen, the politicians, the presidents of universities in some cases, the white men over 50 who have never learned how to type because they always had a secretary who did it for them. I actually worry about their becoming highly disadvantaged in their resistance to learning this skill that they might have learned earlier. I worry more about them than I worry about the Tuareg tribesmen that I showed this to in the desert north of Timbuktu about 2 months ago, who immediately understood how to operate it. It took me about half an hour to teach them how to operate it, and immediately understood what they, as Tuaregs, could do on the World Wide Web. There was one of them who said, I have a camel train that goes to a salt mine many, many kilometers from here, And I've always wondered how to find people that would like to come along on my camel train and would help supplement what little I make with salt hauling. And now you have shown me the way I could find those very few people in the world who would like to pay to come along on my caravan. This was within half an hour of his encountering this. And I have spent days with members of the United States Senate where I didn't get anywhere near that far. So I worry less about those who presently do not have and more about those who have and are about to be left out of the conversation.
Creus que hi ha algun altre ús subversiu del ciberespai a banda de prendre la paraula? Hi ha altres possibilitats més diferents? O només en prendre la paraula creus que hi ha prou?
I think that ideas are living things. I think that ideas differ from other living things only in that other living things are carbon-based patterns of information, and ideas tend to come out of carbon-based patterns of information. And that ideas have their own ecology and their own evolution and their own reproductive strength. And we are finally entering into a condition where we will find out what ideas are most powerful. And in a sense, in the process, what we will find out is what is human nature. Because I think that human beings are basically good. I think that what human beings want is good. And I think that human beings, given the opportunity, will choose those ideas to believe that will make them more open and more loving and more compassionate and more connected. I could be wrong about this, but now we'll get a chance to see. Because we will have the evolution in a very rapid period of time of those ideas that are most reproductively robust. And they will spread, and others will not.
És cert que la universitat hauria d'incorporar en un futur no molt llunyà un tema de no presencialitat important a partir del ciberespai? I és cert també que podria ser possible que dintre 10-15 anys un estudiant, evidentment potser no tots els ensenyaments podran ser possibles, però n'hi ha alguns, un exemple, economia, on tota l'economia s'ha estandarditzat els seus ensenyaments a nivell mundial, en comptes d'anar a la universitat més propera que tenia fins ara, pugui des d'aquí Morella matricular-se a Harvard, a Yale o a London School?
This is already true. I know that at the Institute of Politics at Harvard, where I will be teaching next spring, that there are 4 students that will be taking courses from Mongolia in an experiment between the Mongolian government and Harvard. I think that when I asked the question about how many of you had learned how to use a computer in a traditional instructional environment, you answered much of your own question about the future of universities. That universities, as they have been for the last 250 years, are going to change fundamentally and quickly. But what universities need to be in the future, I think, is more akin to what monasteries were, and also repositories such as Averroes used not too far from here to maintain the memory of humanity. Because in a condition of too much information, it's going to be necessary for somebody to sort through that information and preserve that which should not die. So even as the works of the Greeks were lost to all but the Arabs for many, many years. They were still preserved and then rediscovered by by the Christian world and used again. Universities have to become the memory of humanity, and they have been part of that role before, and they can do it again.
Speak with us, not to speak at us. I'm more concerned with the role of teachers, of lecturers. During these days, it's been said here that in 10 years, within 10 years, all the teachers will put all of their notes into the web, and the students will just read them from home without any effort. I really hate this kind of sort of apocalyptic discourse. Well, what do you think about that? Is it, I mean, it's real that we sort of repeat many times the same lesson, you know, along the year with different groups, but is it possible, for example, to transmit the ideology we convey in classes in the net? Is it possible to train students at the same way in the net? What will we do in 10 years then?
I don't want to replace one lecture with another. I mean, the idea of having the lecturer be online is even worse than having the lecturer be up at the lectern. I mean, somebody once told me that a lecture was a condition where someone else talks in your sleep. And I wouldn't want to reproduce that model at all. I think that the model that we should go back to was the one that Socrates used. And I actually think that the best place for that model to exist in many ways will always be here between people. I don't think of cyberspace as being a substitute for what I call meat space at all. And in fact, what I use cyberspace for more than anything else is to make it possible for me to find my way through to real conversation with real people in real places, such as we now are. Had it not been for the internet, I would never have met Laurence. I would never have met any of you. And we would not have this opportunity to really talk. That's what it's good for. It's not good for becoming another broadcasting system, whether it's for lecture notes or television newscasters. It's good for beginning a conversation and for supplementing the information in that conversation, so that if we're here together and we're conversing and we want to know something that is not immediately available to us, we can go zap, do a quick search, find it, and become more informed together. It's not one lecturer's notes, it's every lecturer's notes.
Llavors jo li demano, en aquells moments, què mos aconsella en els catalano-pensants dins el món del ciberespai? Com ho veu vostè, que és un observador que mos pot enfocar des de fora, des de la distància, que contempla, som uns indígenes, nosaltres som uns indis que intentem resistir i que a més volem utilitzar totes les eines tecnològiques alliberadores de cara a que aquesta visió del món, aquest pensament català arribi a tot el món. Els catalans sempre hem estat, heu de llegir Pujols, hem estat uns... Els catalans creiem que hem d'anar a qualsevol lloc del món i mos han de convidar només perquè som catalans.
Vinga, sí.
Well, okay, one of the things that I really want to leave you with, more importantly than anything else, is that we are entering a time where understanding and paradox are the same thing. That we are leaving a time where we thought of everything as being either or contradictory, or one versus the other, or oppressor versus enslaver, to a time when we will understand that it is always both and. That everything contains its opposite and can be expected to. And the United States is a beautiful example of this. I would say that for all of having been the country that represented liberty for the longest time to the most people, it is now possibly the most effectively oppressive country in the world. And its methods of being oppressive are incredibly subtle and sometimes brutal. It is still a free place. I think of myself as an American, and I could only have been produced by that culture. But at the same time, we have more people in jail than they have in the so-called police state of the People's Republic of China, which has 5 times more people than we do. That is not a contradiction. It is a paradox. It is an irony. And this is definitely the golden age of irony. And one of the things that I think you have here, not only in Catalan culture, but also in the Iberian Peninsula, is a profound sense of irony. You come from the combination of 2 very different cultures, and you have always had to try to work out the differences between those 2 cultures and to incorporate them both at the same time, even while keeping them separate. And this gives you a huge advantage if you use it. I think that it's going to be very hard for a lot of the Northern Hemisphere to appreciate the idea that the truth is not something that has had half of itself amputated.